Thanks so much for
Hi.
having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. I'm really excited to be here. I love the Power to Fly community and am very grateful for them for even having this conversation around financial inclusion, and really excited to be talking to my friend Jennifer Barrett on this topic. Finance, money's power, right? And if
That's
we're going to
right.
change the way that the world operates, we need to really be rethinking how money flows and money goes and our attitudes towards money. So I'm really excited for this chat. Let me start. I'll say, because I actually earmarked some excerpts from the book that I want to read. But so nearly half of working women in the United States are now the household's main breadwinner, and we know that these numbers are even higher for Black and Brown women. But yet, on the whole, you're saying that we're not being brought up to think like breadwinners. So, talk to us about this mindset. I mean, I'm a big believer in mindset, and what inspired you to write this book.
Sure. So as you said, a record number of women are moving into the breadwinning role. There's been a real paradigm shift in the breadwinning model, but we're still, for the most part, bringing up women not to think of themselves as breadwinners or wealth builders or providers. And so the distinction really is that, if you think about real independence, it's not just about being able to cover the bills or the check at dinner, which is the way so many of us have sort of been brought up to think about money. It's like, can I cover the bills? It's really about being able to provide yourself with the life and the future you want. And that means being able to build wealth. And that is a big omission for so many women in the way that we are brought up to think about money. So that was a big impetus for this. But what really started this journey was I had my own wake-up call. And I was in my early 30s at the time, thought I was doing a lot right financially. I had a good job, steady paycheck. I was covering half the bills. I was married, and half the rent, and had a little 401k and some savings, and paying off my credit card debt. And we had a toddler at the time, and we're in a one-bedroom apartment in New York, which is not all that unusual. But I was up with him and trying to get him back to sleep. And it really dawned on me that we were in an unsustainable situation. And I hadn't really been taking the steps financially toward the things that I really wanted, which was second kid, the ability to stay in New York. We obviously needed a bigger place. We wanted to buy a place of our own, and I hadn't been saving or investing in order to do those things. So for me, that was a real moment of reckoning, because I thought I was so independent. And I realized that deep down, I had been counting on my husband to take the lead financially. Just as my dad had when I was growing up, he was the main or sole breadwinner for most of my childhood. And what I realized was that in letting someone else sort of take the lead, or putting it on them, putting the onus on them, it left me really dependent on someone else and vulnerable. And I realized that if I really wanted to have agency over my life, I needed to be a lot more active in my finances and financial planning, and kind of taking the lead around saving and investing for the things that were so important to me. And, I wondered, why hadn't I been doing these things? And so I looked back kind of at my upbringing, and everyone sort of has a different upbringing around this. But for me, my role model was a father who was the breadwinner. So I asked myself, well, what if I'd been raised to be a breadwinner? What if I had been raised to believe I would be fully financially responsible for myself for life, and probably a family too? Would that change the choices I made with my money? And the answer, of course, is a resounding yes. And so it really transformed the way that I looked at money. And I started making my choices based on the question of, am I bringing myself closer or further away from the future that I want? And, after that, of course, I spoke to a lot of other women and realized I wasn't alone, and really looked at the messaging that so many of us get around our ability to provide for others and to build our own wealth, and thought, okay, there's a big gap here that we need to close. And that's what really spurred the book.
Yeah, yeah. I use the term collective socialization a lot when we talk about the work of A Call to Men, and how men are collectively socialized to think that they have to be a certain way. And we, obviously, as women, are the same, collectively socialized. And so you talk about how women are taught to budget, right?
Yes.
But not to invest. And we both come from media backgrounds. So it'd be interesting to share. There's some great examples in here where you actually dive into the data on how media talks about investing for women, and it's generally in expensive clothing.
Yes.
But talk to me about this, this collective socialization, where even women who are like, I never questioned whether or not I would work. I always thought that we have an equal partnership. Let's unpack that a little more.
Yeah, and I think actually there are a number of women who don't necessarily grow up believing that they can count on other people. So they are already raised with a sort of breadwinning mentality, but what I'm talking about goes beyond just, being able to cover the bills. It's really being very confident and competent in your ability to have a career that will support you throughout your life and really feeling comfortable investing and building your own wealth, which regardless of how you were raised is a big omission for most of us. And to your point, it's true. It starts all the way back in childhood for so many of us. And there's research that shows that when parents do talk to their kids about money, and mind you, a lot of parents don't even do that, but when they do, they tend to talk differently to their girls than to their boys. So they're talking to their girls about how to budget and how to spend smartly. And they're talking to their boys about how to build credit and build wealth. So it really starts all the way back in childhood. I don't even think that it's conscious a lot of times. I think it's just based on this old assumption that those were the skills that each gender would really need, that men would be taking the lead on managing investments, building wealth, that women would be taking the lead on managing the budget, right? And that's just not the case for so many people. We end up being really ill prepared for all the things that we want to do in our life and all the financial skills we need to support that. And then on top of that, if you look at culturally, the models that we have in movies and television shows, in books and in media, most women don't work, or they are they're underworking or not working at all. Most of the higher paying jobs in culture go to men. Gina Davis has done a tremendous amount of work on this with her Media Institute. And then on top of that, magazines that are targeting women tend to talk about money in terms of saving for something you want to buy, like a handbag or a girl's getaway or whatever it is. But it's really about saving framed as saving money for something you want to purchase in the future. And so many of the articles are really about paying off debt and saving money and cutting back. And there's been a lot of research around this. One in particular I mentioned was the Starling Bank research, where she looked at 300 articles. Most of the ones targeting women were about budgeting, cutting back, clipping coupons, paying down debt. And for men, it was all about earning more money, investing your money, becoming a millionaire. It's just a completely different way that we're talking to women and men about money. And that really needs to change, not just so that we can close these gaps in wealth, and the gender wage gap and the gender leadership gap, but because realistically, so many women are now going to be in the breadwinning role, and we really need to be set up for success in that role. And I think we're just not doing that now. So that was the real impetus for this book.
And I underlined this. Nearly 1 in 4 kids in this country is growing up with a single mom,
yes,
an unprecedented number.
Yes.
And data show that there are actually more single millennial moms than married ones.
Yes. This is huge. And we don't talk about it. We don't even talk about the fact that there's been this paradigm shift in the breadwinning model. I mean, if you look at the surveys, more people say they still prefer the traditional breadwinning model, men and women. So there's this real disconnect, I think, culturally between what the reality is right now and how we're talking about this with men and women, or thinking about men and women's roles in the household and at work.
Yeah. Well, and this to me, it speaks to a way that we can claim our power. When I started Style House in 2006, I remember saying that the folks in the boardroom, all that they really care about us as women is how we consume and how we spend our money, and whether that's on things to help us feel more beautiful or, all these types of things. But it's not, come invest with us. Let's help. Yes. Let's put more money together.
Yes, it really was. I mean, women have for a long time been spoken to as consumers. The assumption has been, and it still holds true, that women do make most of the purchasing decisions. But again, we're not talking to women about how to invest and build wealth. It's like how to save money to buy a pair of shoes, not how to save money to buy the house that will hold the closet that will hold the shoes. It's just completely different. And we really need to shift that narrative.
Precisely. All right, so let's get into some brass tacks. So you have on the website, you write on the Acorns website, where you are the Chief Education Officer, which I love that role for you, because you came up in media and financial education, and now you're in the role to really change the way that we talk about these things, and I love that.
My goal.
So take us through the 3-step process to lay out how to grow your wealth, so everyone can get ready.
Sure. Well, I think it really starts with, your income is the springboard for all your wealth building efforts. And we already know that there is a gender wage gap of 18% or more compared to white men. And so we already are sort of starting behind the starting line. And so it's even more important that we advocate for ourselves and be really strategic about the jobs we take, the career path we pursue, to make sure that we are going to be able to earn the income we need to support the life that we want. There's a lot of research out there that shows still that, we are less likely to ask for a promotion than men are. We are less likely to get one, but a lot of that has to do with us advocating for ourselves. And there's a lot of research showing that we tend to do a lot of non-promotable work. So a lot of office housework, things like that, where it sort of takes our energy away from the work that is actually going to move us toward that next promotion. So I talk a lot about that in the book, that even just thinking very strategically about your job, and as you get one, thinking, what is the next role that I want? And what do I need to do now to get to that role? A lot of times we just aren't thinking that way, and we're not brought up to think that way about our career, or really even to factor in the income as much as we probably should. If you look at the data, women still disproportionately go into the lowest paying majors, the lowest paying careers. Even in the highest paying careers, we choose the lowest paying path. So obviously this isn't everyone, but this is a pretty big number. I mean, these are general trends that we're still seeing. And that tells me that we still aren't really looking at income as being a really big criteria when we think about our career. And it should be. And if it's not, and if you're still passionate about something that pays less, to really think about, okay, how are you going to close that gap so you can support the life you want, and close it in a way that doesn't include credit cards, of course, because that is actually how they're marketed to us, which is, don't worry, you're not earning a lot. You can still have the things you want. You've got credit cards, and that's a really dangerous cycle. So step one is really making sure you earn them. Sorry.
Yeah. I was just say, starting with income. I mean, I've even seen it from some of my clients in corporate America, where some of the barriers that have to be broken down is even just like some of their bosses feel like they should be grateful to even be there. Right. Yes. And, our mutual friend Eve Brodsky says what keeps her up at night is that 70% of men in the top 1% of government and politics have a traditional stay-at-home life.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
These are people that are making the biggest decisions.
That's it. I mean, that's where you see the traditional breadwinning model is for the men who are largely in power and making the most money. And so that, of course, affects the way that they are viewing the world and making decisions for the workplace, making decisions in Congress. And they're out of touch with the reality of so many Americans right now. And so it is important to keep that in mind too, and really be advocating for the things we need, like paid leave and all of that. But yes,
a contract that devalues you continues to devalue you for the length of the contract.
That is right. I mean, that's it. Even a $5,000 difference in salary over the course of your career can add up to $1 million in losses in terms of earned income versus someone who's starting off $5,000 higher than you. This is research out of Carnegie Mellon. So when you're thinking about even a few $1,000s a year, it's not just that your income is higher, it's that you can put more into your 401k or your 403b. It's that the baseline for your next raise is going to be higher. It just has this kind of exponential effect over your career. So that's so important. So that's a long way of saying step one, make sure that you've got a really solid foundation, with the income that's coming in, and that you're earning the most you can at any point in your career in the role that you're in. And then number two is, I always say, use every paycheck as an opportunity to be less dependent on your next paycheck. That's kind of a different way of looking at paychecks, or it was for me when I made that mindset shift, which used to be, what can I afford with the paycheck that I'm getting? And now it's, how much of my paycheck can I set aside in a high yield savings account, in investing, so that I can start building wealth, so that I can reach all these midterm goals that I have and become less dependent on my future paychecks? Because the last thing you want to do is be, living paycheck to paycheck. And the easiest way to break that habit is to start taking, even if it's a small amount, start putting that into savings, start putting that into investing. As that money grows, you can start putting more money into it. And there's a momentum that builds there, I think, for you as you're moving more money into that account, as you're seeing that money grow. It's giving you a confidence. It's allowing you to be less dependent on your paycheck. You show up differently at work. I found that I showed up a lot more powerfully when I realized I wasn't 100% dependent on each of these paychecks, which is a really vulnerable place to be in. And the other thing is that you want your money to be working at the same time that you are, and not just for retirement, but for all these goals that you have in the decades before. I mean, it's it's so to our disadvantage that we tend to invest less and later than men, because time is one of the greatest factors when you're talking about investment returns. You want time so that your investment returns can compound, so that your money can grow literally exponentially. You can double and triple the money that you're putting in there because you are investing it regularly. And so many of us miss out on so many years of that because we're waiting, to start investing. We're not getting the message that we need to invest for more than retirement, or we think we need to earn a certain amount before we can start investing. And that is so to our detriment. So I just encourage people to start today with, with whatever amount you can outside of your retirement account, so that you are building that fund that will ultimately be your freedom fund. And then I would say the third is making it automatic, which is just, you don't even want to think about it. You just wanted to go. I mean, when I started, I thought, all right, I'm going to stretch myself a little bit, and I'm going to put a little more than I want to into my savings, a little more than I want to into my investment account, knowing that I can always move that money back. But as behavioral economists will tell you, we don't tend to do that. Once we've set that up and we start seeing that money grow, we learn to live on less. We really do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. We're resilient, if this year hasn't taught us anything.
Right. And you hate to pull that money when you see it growing, the feeling of taking that money then out of that savings account or that investment account as it's starting to grow. It's really hard as a human being. It's hard to do that. So I think you want to set up your scenario so that every motivation is toward building wealth and growing wealth, and try to put as many obstacles between you and taking money out of those accounts as you can.
It comes that you mentioned independence, right? But when we think about breadwinning, it's being accountable to yourself, right? So when you talk
100%.
about the automatics, it's being accountable. I love that. Yes, I talk a lot about customizing our defaults, which is exactly that. Okay, so let's talk about, you also mentioned, so even when women do end up as the main breadwinners, they've been conditioned to feel reluctant and unprepared to manage the role. How can we break free from this? And, this brings up, it's somewhat related to imposter syndrome, right? And this to me is all about mindset. So talk about how we can rethink this.
Yeah, I don't know that it's imposter syndrome in this role so much as it's just so contrary to our expectations in a lot of cases where, where we just weren't brought up to believe that we would be not only providing for ourselves for life, but maybe for a family too. And so if you talk to women who are in the main breadwinner role in relationships, a lot of times they're there by chance, not by choice. And I think that's a really major distinction. So if you talk to women who always sort of plan to be there, maybe they picked a higher earning career and it's not a surprise that they ended up there, they are much happier. Their relationships tend to be much better because they expected to be there. And there's not that resentment or confusion or fear about whether they can handle the role. When women are in there by chance, it's completely different because they're trying to deal with the expectations they had compared to the reality they find themselves in. A lot of times, like in my case, when I moved into that role, it was a conscious choice, but I still felt like I was catching up financially for some of the bad choices I made with my money in my 20s. And so I was catching up at the same time that I was now responsible, not just for myself, but for my family. And I was pregnant with our second child. And so I felt like an enormous responsibility initially. And I do remember thinking God, am I up for this? Is this the role I'm going to be in for the rest of my life? What does this mean? And so I did have a lot of those questions and some self-doubts there. And it really took a few years of getting comfortable in that role. And first of all, feeling confident that I could be the main breadwinner and also be a really good mom. I had to sort of bust through those kind of cultural assumptions about who will be the main caregiver and what being a good mom means to get to a point where I felt like, we're rewriting the rules here. I want to be able to spend quality time with my kids. It doesn't mean I need to pick them up every day from school to be a good mom, but it takes a little bit to get through that cultural conditioning and get really comfortable with that. And the second part is, because we're not taught a lot of these skills, especially investing. I mean, most Americans don't get a good financial education, but women in particular we are not brought up to think of ourselves as wealth building. We're sort of given the message that wealth building is not for us, other than putting a little bit into our retirement accounts. And that's really not the case. And so when we do find ourselves in a position where we're thinking, actually, I do need to invest, I do need to save some money for these things that I want, we're often early to mid-career. And it's a little embarrassing sometimes to say, I don't even know where to start. I feel really uncomfortable about it. And I think we need to remove that shame too, and just say most people really don't know a lot about investing. And there is no shame in asking a lot of questions about it, because the truth is the vast majority of Americans were not educated about how to invest. And it can seem very complex and complicated, and it really isn't. But if you feel this barrier of, I should know this already, or it's embarrassing that I haven't started investing, or whatever the story is in your mind, and it keeps you from taking that step, just bust through it. I mean, we really need to get to the point where there's no shame in saying, I don't know how to do this. Where should I go to find out?
Knowing these things. I say that to entrepreneurs all the time who have questions for me. People aren't born knowing these things.
No, and we're not taught. Most of us are not taught.
And it's not, I would say it's not just that we're not taught, but I would go so far as to say that some of it is purposefully mystifying.
Oh, yes.
To be exclusive in nature.
Of course.
Again, why this conversation is so important. Okay, so speaking of, let's look at the chat. So we have a question from Callie Lynn. A prominent global financial company tooted their horn in conducting a study gender income inequality. How do you or can you address this in your performance review? Oh, right. So your employer, now that you know you are being paid less than your male or white coworkers. And let me read the next one because maybe we can bring it all together. So I'm finally hitting a stride in my career where I feel financially secure enough to invest for retirement, a home, or freedom funds, as you said. I feel like I'm starting so late and I don't know where to begin. Do you have any resources you'd recommend for someone with basically no investment or financial literacy? Okay, first, I love that you put that in the chat. That makes me so happy that we're going to be able to have this conversation. And I think it will help a lot of other people too. So should I let me jump on the asking for more question first and tell you as someone, sorry, they're doing construction above me. And as someone who has been in management now for 12 years, I can tell you from both being on either side of this, what has really worked is when you go in with a case, make sure that you bring a lot of data to back it up and make it about the numbers, which helps take all the emotion out of it. So what can be really effective is doing market research to see what other people are getting paid in your role, in your area, and make sure that you're toward the top of that. And especially if the role that you were hired into has expanded, which it almost always does, if you can come in and say, I was hired to do this. I am now doing all of this as well. People who are doing this, or have a role that's similar to this in my area are making X amount more, or we know that so-and-so down the hall is now making X amount more than I am for this role. And then also bring in really quantifiable examples of how you're bringing value to the company. So you build this case with a lot of data. Like, here's what other people are making. It's this much more than me. Here's the value that I'm bringing to this company, have been bringing for the last 6, 12 months, whatever it is. I've succeeded, I've surpassed my metrics, whatever you can do to quantify that. And then you say, I really want to stay here and continue to bring value for this company. How can we close that gap a little bit? So now you're both sort of looking at this together. How can we solve this problem together so I can stay at this company that I love and continue to bring a lot of value here? And that's a really easy way for a manager to say, okay, yeah, let's see what we can do here, versus like any implication that you're pointing the finger or whatever, you don't want to put your manager on the defense. You want them to sort of be on your side, looking together at how you're going to solve this problem of closing the gap so that you don't have to leave and cost them a lot of money in finding someone else to replace you as a valuable employee. That's how I always look at it. Right? This is years of experience. So, and people have done this to me. And when they do, I think, it's very hard to say no to that, right? When someone brings a case like that, what are you going to say? You're either going to say, we can't afford to pay you that. And then really, you don't want to stay there anyway. Or you're going to say, you know what, let's see what we can do to close this gap, because you put it on them, like showing how unfair it is. And then of course, they're going to want to help you close that gap, particularly if you are a valuable employee and you can show that quantifiably. So good luck with that. Yeah. And the next one for resources that you recommend to someone with quote unquote, basically no investment or financial literacy. Yeah. And that's so many of us. So I think recently we're really lucky that so many apps have come about that make it a lot easier to invest. I will of course have to mention Acorns because I work there, but truly I believe one of the reasons I went there was because of our feature that is so well known, which is the Roundup feature where you connect your card, we round up your purchases, we invest the difference. It usually adds up to $30 to $35 a month for most people. But it can't get easier than that. Like if you don't know what you're doing, we invest in a portfolio that has exposure to hundreds of stocks and bonds. And we give you a questionnaire and we recommend a portfolio based on that. So it's really like the whole idea is set it and forget it. And then as you become more comfortable, learning about investing, and there are tons of resources on our side and on Grow, which is our financial literacy site. That's grow.acorns.com. Then you can try your own hand at investing.
We don't offer that at Acorns, but obviously there are tons and tons of companies, from Robinhood to Fidelity to Schwab to so many companies that do allow you to sort of pick your own stocks as well. And I do recommend that you put most of your money into things like index funds, because that gives you really broad exposure to a lot of different stocks for very little money. You're basically buying a share in a fund that buys shares in lots of different companies, and it's a way to automatically diversify. So it's a good strategy when you're just starting out, and then you can take some money and start picking different stocks if that's attractive to you or not. I mean, some people just invest in index funds for life and they do quite well. Ask Warren Buffett. He's a huge fan of index funds.
Right.
So
I love it. Well, I'm so happy that we're having this conversation. I also, I've seen a proliferation of women, Black women, and, other degrees of marginalized people really offering frank, transparent financial education online. And so I really encourage people to get in a wormhole. Like, people have the same questions that you do. So if there's a word that you feel is like, scary or overwhelming, or it doesn't make sense to you, or as soon as someone gets to that point in the conversation, your eyes glaze over, like, just like go into the discomfort. And, Acorns is a great resource for that. And there's lots of other ones as well. And oh my gosh, we're already at time. It always flies by.
Like this, right?
Thank you, Jennifer, for this
Thank you for
chat,
having me.
this book that's really important. And thanks for Power to Fly for giving us the stage.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both, Janna and Jennifer. That was an amazing chat. I was really happy to sit in on it. And I can't wait to read your book. That the reframing of, the idea of building wealth versus scrimping and saving is huge. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you for having me.